I think last week was particularly, I know that I was very excited about your presentation she made. What did you take away? What do you remember as relevant?
I think I'm not sure they fully understood or how like I forgot what the issue was. Oh yeah, that's yeah, I think what I wasn't fully sort of convinced about was in terms of the sort of like the media sort of channeling of like well the issue of how kind of successful it is at social agency or whether I mean it doesn't have to be social agency on one level but sort of the artwork at the end of it, perhaps the social agency is there, but sometimes it's like the actual media, sort of new media channeling, if it's like the practice is very limited in that then there's not much scope for liberation in terms of everybody being channeled to do the same thing. If you sort of set that apart from what larger thing happens from that, which may be liberation or not. But and I suppose it's the question of participation. To what extent people are being exploited in that process, and if they're not actually involved with it, if the artwork sort of is on another level, then perhaps it's quite exploitative. But obviously on another level. So it's a difference between the World Wide Web and the internet, and so not any network or grid is necessarily kind of like really more radically liberational. So I was a bit suspicious, like the photo booth one, and a lot of the sort of the map. But I think that like so the map ones where they sort of people are asked to go on and plot or it's collecting data, they're either contributing by sort of saying where they are, or it's picking up data. So if it's picking up tweets or with the photo booth one, they're participating as a participatory element. So I suppose I'm like it's not like I think all these sort of new media practices necessarily good examples of social agency. They can be quite exploitative, so it's a matter, there's an ethics in how what they are doing. It's not like it's socially engaged practice, therefore it's good, that it's the problem solved. But I think that's sort of like, and how if I understood more what she was saying, I think I'd probably be more like I think she's actually after the positive or liberatory sides, which she's not intending to like just utilise participation for an artwork that may or may not be liberational. So I wouldn't say that was her aim, but I just think that can happen. And I suppose I thought with that photo booth one, it looked like it probably was happening a bit. In terms of the text, the use of the phones with SIM cards and things, all that sort of sopping and stuff. But yes, obviously that's that's using technology and like breaking with how it's supposed to sort of powers that monopolise it. But I'm not sure how much that was really like an art form, or just something that was happening, and it's
I missed the beginning of it, so I missed how it was set up. So I may have got lost from that point onwards. But the opacity of it, for me, I mean, I find it interesting, but I find it also quite opaque. Partly personal preferences as much as anything else, but I'm quite concrete. I like to see how, or a sense of how you deal with something as an idea in some form of concrete form, and I couldn't quite relate the work that she was showing as a practice to how that's then presented or realised as an aesthetic object, or as something to how one might engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because on the one hand, it seemed that there was a whole sort of discourse around communications, but I could just as easily have sat in a communication studies or communication theory meeting to go through a lot of the same kind of issues. What I wasn't quite sure then is how you use that, or how that becomes material, both as some form of a thing to grasp in the world, but also something that becomes necessary to grasp or necessary to deal with.
My enthusiasm for it was precisely your question. That is that which is not far from what you're saying as well, when you separate the possibility of technology from the power that organizes it to function well, is that all these things are not art per se, but if they become art, they require a completely different way of engaging with them than the one we know.
Yeah.
So there is, and that I found, that was the beginning of my research years back, when I realized that Benjamin was talking about something similar, speaking about technology, when he says that cinema and photography cannot be engaged with as if they behaved in the same way as painting and sculpture. They are not technologies that allow for contemplation. There is something else to be done. Yeah. And if we use them as the previous technology, we constrain, suffocate, make them represent what other cultures were, and that brings on the dialectical materialism, it says. Make them say the story of the previous paradigm is repressive and fascist, allow them to say is the technology that produces the culture that is supposed to produce. Now, in this case, we don't know where this technology can go, and they can be exploited. I mean, the whole of relational practices, participation, to me, is an exploitation of the public for the sake of the artist, as well as something else, because it's always there. I did work on that in the past, trying to expose this problem. But there, she was somehow trying, look, there are all these things happening in these new countries, or these new cities that are countries that are explosive in number of population, energy, disparity of wealth, and the technology arrives without all the steps that we know. One thing that I found very interesting was when she was really emphasizing how mobile phones have arrived without computers or landline being there first. Yeah. So the one went from countryside with a goat to the mobile phone, and without anything in between. And that obviously takes away the paradigm, the pre-existing paradigm makes you use the mobile phone as a normal phone or something like that, because you use it for completely different possibilities than what we carry with us as a baggage.
Have you, this may be a big sideline, but it may relate. Has anybody here come across Sedition as an online gallery project? So this is it's S edition or Sedition, and it's an organisation that aims to sell limited edition digital pieces. So I get an email once a day or once every other day, something like that, that shows me I could be one of 50 people to have my own digital copy of X work. Presumably I could put on a nice flat screen thing at home, or I could have it as my wallpaper on my computer or something like that. But does that have a bearing on how we think about how we engage with mobile technology, both as an item, but also how it networks or connects us as an aesthetic object or as a means by which we have an aesthetic experience. I'm trying to drag us back to that for a second.
I don't know if it can be called an aesthetic object, precisely because the aesthetic object might be something that can exist within certain technology and not others. But I'm interested in discussing the possibility of an aesthetic experience.
Yeah.
If we think of it in the Kantian terms of the problem of finding.
Sure, but as an object, the technology becomes relatively unimportant. But it's how one experiences the world through a mobile or through technology. But does was what Jennifer was talking about that relate to that use of the phone? Because when she showed, for example, there was a performance art piece, wasn't there, in the fouled water.
Yeah.
That was. I mean, that was taken on an ordinary camera. That was taken on a large video camera because we had a conversation about whether the audience was there because she was in the water or whether she was there because it was being filmed. So that wasn't about the mobile technology as such, or the
no, it wasn't all about the technology. Then it expanded on how, and that was another very interesting point because I remember that Joe, who was sitting there, was saying that no, there's a problem with all performances now that they exist as a documentation, so then the camera is never used. And then we were also saying how, well, at this point, the camera is part of the performance. So it very much depends on where we are deciding to set the frame for this piece. And because the performance per se was a symbolist performance that could have fitted in the 60s probably, but now it was very flat. But at least for our sensitivity, we probably would lack the cultural references, watch and someone should go in the neighborhood and the pool of sewage and all that. But it seemed to be rather uninteresting. Yet what the camera created was a whole stage, and that for me was the artistic quality of what was being said, beyond the meaning of it. Does it make sense?
Yeah, what is it I didn't quite get? I mean, it's hard to see because somebody was sitting right. But I also felt like I didn't get what I didn't get what I was supposed to get from that piece. So.
Well, there was a street with a huge. It was flooded with sewage, and the artist. There were two. It was a couple walking together, and you would see her walking toward the pool, toward the yes.
Hello. Do you mind if are you waiting for me?
No, she's not here today.
Oh, right, okay. Do you mind if I join you? Feel free. I'm Theo, by the way. Remember the stuff.
Should we briefly say our names?
Yeah.
I'm Dane. I'm the CFAR Research Systems. I research materiality, temporality, and time as a way in which morphogenic qualities of artwork can be realised.
I'm situated between the School of Media and the School of Art, CFAR, doing research around the production of meaning, or the creation of meaning through the production of live music events.
Hi, I'm Jo. I'm a first year PhD student, and I'm looking at the art object and how this works in a
I think I overheard
room.
some of your tutorial with Dave upstairs.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Khulud. This is my first year as PhD student. I'm interested in sculpture and light.
I'm Samira. I'm a painter, an artist in residence.
I'm Oscar. I'm a photographer and filmmaker, and I'm interested in identity.
I'm Dora. I'm interested in notions of event. Currently trying to work out, yesterday I was reading John Gribben's Multiverse, so I'm just trying to work out the different infinities involved and whether it's really he gets whether there's still an idealism in that rather than immersive discontinuity, which I think is an important notion in relation to immanence. So I'm not quite sure that even his multiverses still don't bring in a kind of adding bit because it's already like got these ideal all possibles. So wherever you read, like when you get all these sort of the notion of possibilities, where there's all possibles, even if they aren't kind of like realised, that already prefigures something. So that's the point. I think you lose the immersive discontinuity where it's more radical difference, the capacity for more radical difference. So, but John Gribbins, I might be forced to accusing him. I haven't quite finished with him.
I'm Kate. I'm a senior lecturer in drama at Newman University. Finished my PhD in 2011. I'm currently working on the intersection of psychoanalytic and philosophical conceptions of desire and how they relate to performance.
Hi, I'm Stuart, just started a PhD. It's beyond the landscape. I really don't know what I'm doing at the moment, so that'll be enough for now.
Mattia, we met once. I'm a PhD student, I'm not finished, and I am in the same situation as Stuart. I can do it anymore.
2 years.
I am somehow trying to figure out how possibilities, which are not far from what Laura just described, might be considered as dimensions or poetic curvatures, if what is required to think like that. It seems to be the universe without metaphysics, but how does one get there? That's what I'm trying to explain. What we were discussing now is we've been reading since the beginning of the term in tandem the Critique of Judgment of Kant and the Courage of Truth of Foucault. And last week we had a visiting lecturer from New York, Jennifer Bajorek, who is working between media, philosophy and art. And she is collaborating with a number of organizations and universities in Nairobi and Johannesburg. And she was looking at how technologies of communication, contemporary technologies of communication, are somehow adopted in these huge new human environments, mega cities that are multimedia places. Having arrived there without all the steps that the rich West has known, so the lack of a grid, the lack of computer, desktop computers, go straight into smartphones. No diaphone, no the smartphone arrives, and how that is used by artists, or potentially can be used by artists, and now create possibilities for political agency, aesthetic. We were trying to go over what we heard last week in order to start. And I was talking.
Sorry to interrupt.
But what was I saying?
Into the back.
The sewage. Yes, the example of the performance.
She was going over to the sewage.
It was going over to the sewage. No, it's
The
the camera, yeah. Now the camera sets the stage, so it becomes wider than. Well, it doesn't matter now. It's wanted to. There were other elements in her presentation that were all surrounding to me this problem of how something that is not yet an aesthetic technology or an aesthetic object can nevertheless develop into an aesthetic experience, which is your question as well. And as such, I believe it gives you material, gives material for an answer to you as well, because the issue of having political agency, gaining some agency, freeing some agency, might well be only through finding which specific dimensions belong to that new technology rather than adopting it to represent the previous ways of acting. Linking it to the Benjamin understanding of technology.
Yeah. I suppose this question is like, you could almost say, you could almost contrast that with like technology being a nature, and rather than the artist being like just kind of resorting to like the expressionism of the technology, but being political in that they are employing a sort of decisiveness. So this would be to contrast like where Lyotard says there's nothing less natural in terms of art. So and he says contrasts it with the sort of causality or event of art that in its as its expressionism is kind of reconciled with nature as an expression. So like as opposed to an artist who comes along and works, the artwork had been in reverse, or sort of there's this notion of a sort of he uses the term decisiveness in relation to politicality. So this other element. So but to respond to what you said, it seems like you're saying that each new technology has its capacities. So I'm saying, well, is that just like we're happy to just go along and reconcile art will be those capacities, as opposed to sort of, isn't there another element where the artist actually takes decisiveness in situ? Here in
When you say in situ, you mean
technologies.
takes decisiveness upon those capacities versus others?
Well, it's not just about like technologies' capacities as their kind of new capacities for expression. It's what the artist in situ sort of works with them that is another level of disruption. That's where the politicality comes in. Or potentially.
So it's sort of, is the technical term affordances for technologies? I mean, a certain piece of technology has an affordance in it, and it affords a particular use, or sort of, yeah.
It can be technology. It can be a performance. It can be any given situation or any given thing that's used as a technology, which doesn't have to be something with a battery. That has an affordance to it. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it's like when we're talking usage. I suppose when I'm sort of more about like the new technology's capacity for emergence, but still saying that even its new capacity for emergence, that just being an aesthetic doesn't quite take on board the artist's kind of act in their capacity for this decisiveness element. It doesn't bring in that element unless the artist. That's where I think the ethics comes in. That's where the ethics comes in.
So it has to take into account the artist's truth-telling, would you say?
Yeah.
The artist's parrhesia.
Yeah.
Take us to the Foucault.
That is the artist truth-telling. The artist truth-telling is an open one, so it's the one that might find the possibility of an order or a possibility of a configuration, a sense-making system among the elements of the new technology, rather than thinking that an artist when you use the word expression before, for me, expression was sort of like when Johnny experienced all bells of alarm go off.
Well, I'm rejecting that.
You're rejecting.
I'm rejecting like use of technology as a sort of its emergence as an expression of kind of like as an aesthetic of expression that just happens to be from the media.
Okay, so since we were saying the same thing, that one can do some things with technology and not others, and since the technology, whichever, whether it is sculpting stone or mud, carries with itself an imagery, an ideology, a certain representation of the world in a way or another, then one can only play along those dimensions. It wouldn't make sense to ask digital technology to do the same.
Sorry?
It wouldn't make sense to ask digital technology or mobile phones to do the same than the Sphinx in Egypt does. Because they are different worlds altogether.
I think, can I say something? I think the problem always with this technology is that we always try to make it match with what we already know. So imagine digital photography, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If you open a tool, it's just a darkroom, but translating to digital bits. And so it's really complicated to figure out these technologies without all the background we bring. So at the end, we build up this application based in something that already exists before, or other aesthetics.
The skeuomorphism of the new technologies will be
Or maps, or if you imagine everything was already there. There is nothing that is proper digital, and you cannot find something in the old tradition,
But this is what, in the presentation last week, was very interesting. All the work done with metadata on the uploaded images, maps made by the uploading patterns through Flickr, what's the other one, Instagram, and other things, were particularly interesting. And then that other software called Rashomon, where one could select a number of, any footage uploaded with a tag in space and time at the same moment. So then you could configure, there's something that interestingly is designed, I went on and had a look about it. It's designed by somebody in Berkeley University in the United States, and is especially aimed at political activists on the ground, so that anybody filming an event, which whatever tool they might have, device they might have, then this can be uploaded, put together, and have a sort of Seven Samurai film scenario where everybody has seen something, nobody has seen it all, but you can reconstruct what happened.
You mean Seven Samurai? Do you mean Rashomon?
Yeah,
Rashomon, yeah.
So that's why the name of the
Was
software.
does it have another title? Seven Samurai?
Probably, I
Or
know
was
it's Seven
that
Samurai because
okay.
later it was something called
Yeah.
Sanchez. So that now, can you use that artistically? I don't know. It's interesting to see what you can do with it past the linear application of reconstructing. That's what I mean by what dimension it has are its possibilities, and don't go. It's pointless to think. So then the figure of the artist comes into it as some sort of catalyst or disorder agent that upsets the existing one, or the main. But you said at the beginning the fact that it's interesting, the idea of breaking apart the technology from the use that power makes of it, when you were talking about SIM cards being swapped from phone to phone to phone. And to me that was the most interesting part, is this point of let's see what we can do with this new thing. And that would not be the same thing we were doing with the previous.
Yeah.
And Oscar was absolutely right saying we are using digital in photography as if it were analog photography. It's a bit flat as a progress.
Yes, it's sort of like within some of the this mapping stuff. It's kind of like it's sort of designed to be used in a certain way, but really it's like more interesting to sort of disrupt how it's used potentially. On the other hand, the other issue I sort of felt was like with the mapping stuff was how it's like it seems to sort of like reinforce kind of identities rather than kind of like in contrast to the notion of dispossession. I'm interested in the notion of dispossession, but not dispossession in the sense of like the dispossessed from in a way that's usually understood in terms of people not having property or whatever, or sort of things that they need, more dispossessed in a sense of like how notions of difference. So it seems like if the political liberation from difference comes from like a moment or disruption of dispossession, then it's quite ironic that these technologies sort of seem to be very much locating rather than delocating in terms of what they kind of doing, like the mapping or the selfies. But of course they don't have to be used how they're sort of designed to be used. That can be subverted. But because they're sort of participatory practices, it's sort of like you'd hope to see more practice where the actual sort of function of the application was already a sort of disruption rather than a reinforcement of the mapping of identity or like so the narratives. I thought the narratives in the photo booth didn't really lend themselves to a sort of subversive use of like here I am. It's like kind of it was like the opposite of like kind of a moment of liberation. Like, well, if you think about, well, I mean, it's not like the thing is with the cynics in Foucault, he's like there's a pathway there to a technology of practice of difference, and that's the problem with it. It's almost as if it's like one pathway rather than there are a multiplicity of pathways. I forgot what I was going to link that with the photo booth. Wait, sorry, I've lost what I was going to say.
What are you saying before about the barriers of who's coming to?
Well, I think the Parisian could be it's a weird link, but when someone uploads photos of himself without regarding things like privacy or I don't care, I upload everything I do without no filter. This is a kind of panacea because you're saying everything without criteria. I mean, that could be bad for you if you are looking for a job or you are trying to build up I don't know, some kind of high profile group, but there are people who jump into this void of I'm gonna upload everything I do without filters.
But there's that feels more on the lines of what Lacan would describe as extimacy, where you basically project your intimate self to and broadcast that to the outside world. Noting that way in which social media has become part of the way in which we use our lives. But I would say that the Parisius, or certainly as Foucault begins to outline in his argument, is that the kind of risk that is taken is a risk in care of the other. It's not a risk in simple projection of self. The risk is precisely because of the other. It's not for the purposes of simply exhibitionism or a need to dominate the space or to be a performer or to be the person that's known. It's precisely because of the care of the other that the individual takes risk by making public something about either about the social, or I'm not even sure it's necessarily about the self. I mean, I know that it would be interesting to hear others take on this, but around cynic practice, that it's not that in a sense that was one of the features of cynic practice that was criticised or critiqued, that it was too much about self-display and not necessarily enough about care of another, care of the other.
I think the charge often levelled against Foucault and his ethics is that it's somehow narcissistic, and that the care of the self just leads to a sort of ethics of egoism. But I think it's, just from the little I've read, it's a kind of cultivation of the self for the other. So it's kind of both, but it's passing through the self. And there's a sort of passage in Nietzsche's Daybreak, which is maybe, I don't know, of relevance, where he talks about cultivating oneself as a kind of walled garden that you can kind of invite people into. It has sort of Greek
resonances with the sort of cynics. But it strikes me that it's not, it's not just for the other and it's not just for yourself. It's kind of both.
Yeah.
And a constant play between the two.
Can I just chuck the desire of the other in here? Because my understanding of ecstasy is that it's the desire of the other sort of operating. It's a sort of narcissistic thing. And that parrhesia, it seems to me, the undoing of that. So that desire stops being the socially conditioned, got to take selfies, got to exhibit myself, got to be on social media. But parrhesia is when you reverse that.
I guess
You kind of reclaim your desire.
yeah. I believe you've done something there, because that reclaiming your desire or reclaiming your ex is to me what Foucault is after. I was not after 2 weeks ago. I took a brief note on the train going back, and I thought that constant exhortation that Foucault finds in Socrates, take care of yourselves, take care of yourselves, is not prescriptive, because it doesn't say anything specific more than take care of yourself. What do we have to do for that? What does it mean take care of yourself? There is no morality attached, at least on the surface. And I linked it with what we were reading in Kant about the aesthetic judgment, which recognizes in the object purposiveness without a specific purpose. As in, this object stays together, object has a meaning, is otherwise would disintegrate. But it doesn't have the concept that would constitute the cognition dynamic that finds the object of experience through perception, gives it to the intellect that puts an object on it, and then delivers it for ideas to be organized for it. So this openness that the aesthetic judgment has, and the openness of the take care of yourself, somehow is a constant invitation. What do we use the word? Reverse to reclaim. You are not everything else. You are part of it, but there is some sort of be able to take a moment of distance. That's his take care of yourself.
But it's also a temporal thing. It's making time, because when you look at pattern, you're doing something retroactive. But when you're experiencing sensation, it's not intellectual, because it's just sensory, and so it's kind of going forwards in time. But always when you're kind of looking at something social or conditioned or encoded in any way, you're going backwards in time. So it's a temporal, I think parrhesia is a temporal thing. You stop that and you actually...
When you say you stop that, you stop time from
You stop going back and you just go forwards.
I found that we were planning to read some lectures ahead of the February 15th lectures, but I got stuck on those. And if you remember the second hour of February 15th, where he tries to understand the famous words of Socrates, I now remember that we got to pay Sribius. And Foucault was all around the place trying to figure out all these things and mentions a number of scholars that try to explain it, starting with Nietzsche that says, even Socrates got it wrong, that life is a disease. And then in the end he said, well, remember that it's not life as a disease, but following the common opinion, following what we are expected to do would corrupt us. And we have to, it says, what I'm meaning is take care of yourselves. Retain the possibility of this distance. And the fact that he speaks about Socrates is that takes Socrates as a starting point. It's interesting because Socrates has always been pointed at as the moment when the individual becomes, the subject becomes individuated in a way that is far closer to us than other ways of thinking before that. But the Christians have seized upon it. It's the birth of the soul, they adore that, it's fantastic, and this is why then it becomes a bit of a negative reference point later on. But it seems to me that Foucault revisits this and say, well, there is something positive, which is this constant exhortation, with no strings attached, no prescriptions, to say you are you, and yourself is yours. So you, every time something happens, take a step back, as you said. Don't let yourself be taken by the road flow, and be able to be yourself. Inhabit this property, because it's somehow it's a kind of repossessing, another kind of dispossession that you're talking about here, probably. It's repossessing a different kind of dispossession here. Almost as if this distancing is what makes a subject worthwhile, not just a political object that is moved along, representing big things.
Even in the Cartesian sense of I doubt that, or I am.
Not directly. I mean, I can see why you would associate it. I don't know. It might fit. What does we think of this?
It could be as well, as you say, get some distance from all you know as well, all the things you believe are true, probably, in that aspect of being, don't follow the common opinion, or, you know. So in that aspect, it is related with this thing of don't be able to create something new without looking for references.
For example, the example you were making of digital photography. I don't know if anybody knows the work of Thomas Ruff.
Mm-hmm.
He's a German photographer who hasn't taken a picture probably since the early 90s, and uses existing images, digital images. And it is very much concerned with the aesthetic of the pixel. So there is a sequence, a set of images that he has collected that are relevant images in the history of humanity. Atomic bomb tests, the Twin Towers, but he finds thumbnails online, and then he enlarges them to the size of that thing. So the pixels are these big.
Yeah.
Or other works where he has taken frames from digital porn films and enlarged them. I don't know if he manipulates them at all, but they enlarge these images, go entirely out of focus and seem to vibrate. And somehow it's an interesting work back from the painting of Richter, for example, that paints. Yes, yeah.
Yes, and he has had doing before a big enlargement of ID photograph in the 80s, I think, or something like that. So he's doing this kind of break the.
But it's interesting because the materiality, it goes from the materiality of the small ID photograph enlarged to 2 meters tall or something, to the non-materiality, to use a banal expression, of the pixel, or the anti-materiality of the pixel. And it does something that can only be done with that technology. So it takes a step back from the skeuomorphism of using digital to repeat analog,
Mm-hmm.
and he is himself, and he is there. I would actually identify the image of one who takes care of him or herself, and the artist in this case. It's a very interesting political synthesis of the two things. And he finds a way to raise a question through that disorders the expected use of the technology. And in that sense, it's very interesting. Because otherwise, these photographs are not photographs to be looked at as a beautiful black and white print. Almost, there is nothing to see in those terms.
Have you seen the new notes in, I think, Switzerland, no? That are pixelized notes of euros, pixelized in Sweden, or I don't remember.
Oh,
they come up with
yeah.
new euros with pixels instead of pictures or other things.
On purpose.
On purpose.
Yes, it's also quite
That's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Kind of aesthetic as well. The pixel is an aesthetic thing.
Brilliant.
Does
Can
it
you
make
find
it
them
hard to
there?
forge?
Yeah, I did.
Of these notes and pixels?
Yeah.
Does it make it hard to forge?
Sure.
Does it make it hard to forge it?
Does it make it hard to forge it?
You'd think it
Is
would
that
make
what
it
it-
easier, wouldn't you? I mean, it's,
I don't know. It has to be quite complicated to duplicate in a way, because it has the other kind of security mechanism. Besides, the only thing that changes is the picture. Instead of a picture, it's something pixelated.
Oh, that's Thomas Roth. Yes.
Yeah.
Look new pixelized nodes,
pixelize.
money nodes
Yeah.
in I think euros. I don't know. It's in Sweden
I
or
think it's Sweden, wasn't it? Yeah. Scandinavia.
I might be searching for the wrong thing.
But so the issue of like this, with the cynics in here, it's like the issue of like sovereignty with the contrast with the king aspect. But sovereignty again relates to the question of possession or dispossession. But I mean, you were saying that like other, but it seems like it's more the radical difference comes with otherness rather than kind of like other. So it's sort of this care of the self, I think, is more about sort of the care of otherness or sort of an openness to that, and how you may or may not, that may require dispossession. It may be achievable through practices of possession, like that where we remain in possession, but it may also require like the dispossession where the moment isn't one of another, sorry, it's otherness, so it can't be possessed by me. So when I'm having this other art experience, like that's rupturing something, like am I the subject that's sort of still sovereign over it, or is my sovereignty disrupted? And so I think the otherness here relates to, well, I don't really want to rule out the practices where, I'm not sure that I would say that it can only be achieved by disruptions where the otherness requires a dispossession. But I mean, maybe that's the difference between beauty and the sublime. The sublime requires the dispossession, whereas aesthetics of beauty, you're still the subject, but for me there's still a place for beauty. Yeah. But I mean, but on the other hand, there's and there could, it seems like that's where the ethics of the artist or this decisiveness comes in, because there might be moments when one's practicing where it would be more disruptive, or it would be more political, more relevant to make something beautiful than using something that brings the moment of the sublime.
But which way
Or deploys that
define
rather.
the sublime with dispossession?
Well, when there's the moment of the sublime, there's not the subject having the sublime. I think that's
In a way, you can't
There's-
describe this.
I thought the sublime, it doesn't reach the, I mean, certainly within classical aesthetics, doesn't within as far as Kant, doesn't get as far as dispossessing the subject, but the immensity, the scale, the sublime moment is something that is, because you describe it a bit like being on a boat kind of in the middle of a storm. That's kind of one of the analogies. There's still you're still in the boat in the sense you still got your place, but there's a moment of doubt perhaps because of the
Well, I
you're
think
put at risk because of
I think he introduces, but I thought Leotard's argument was that with Kant you've got the mathematical sublime, which is that one I've just said,
Yes,
and the
yeah.
dynamical sublime, which is the rupture,
That's-
and
yeah.
that's why he does get
But I find because I think this is very interesting, this, but also I was trying to find the line. And I believe you said that Kant never saw the stormy sea because he never left his little tower, which is I find very fascinating. You constantly mentioned these amazing things. You must have seen paintings of those. But I believe he says that the sublime is not love. That's a very strong emotion. The sublime is the mathematical sublime is a problem in the sequence of information entering the subject from the outside reality that again cannot follow the steps of cognition fully. So it goes from it becomes perception and it's fine. So you have this object of perception which is handled by the imagination, and then beyond the problem of beautiful, which doesn't find a content, is compared directly with the idea of reason, which is universal. And this leap is immense because the idea of reason can have the whole image of something but cannot deal with the individual instance. And the individual instance per se cannot be comprehended, cannot comprehend the whole reason because it's too big. It's quantity-wise, you can count up to how many numbers can we imagine? 10, 15 at the most, and then we lose count of it. Then you have to say, well, it's a figure or whatever. So that game is all inside the subject. Everything is inside the subject of Kant, which is beauty and its problem, if you like. So.
Well, no, I think that it is dynamic most of the time. I think that's where it's not contained in the subject. That's where the subject breaks.
Okay,
but then I might have it all wrong.
Well, let's have a look at it because that's the I believe it's quite important.
I haven't got my
figures with what my understanding, which is that the desire of the other is identity, and that's you lose that in the sublime, and it's related to the categorical imperative that he talks about in the because it's how you're socially recognised, and it's Parrhesia's breaking away from that. So it's to do with identity.
Yeah. Yes. Breaking. Because doesn't it say here somewhere isn't the thing with Socrates had to choose between taking the poison or exile, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So for somebody who given those choices, it's like the exile would be a sort of that wouldn't allow him to take care of the self in a way that he. So that's why he chose the poison.
It's more articulated but simpler than that at the same time. In the second hour of February 15, Foucault reconstructs, you find it?
And the ocean.
Yeah, the ocean. Yeah. Is the sublime the ocean? Is not the ocean.
Thus the wide ocean, enraged by storms, cannot be called sublime. It's 129.
5:246.
If you use the Cambridge.
It's 5:246.
Point 23. Second book analytics. Thus the wide ocean, enraged by storms, cannot be called sublime. Its visage is horrible, and one must already have filled the mind with all sorts of ideas, if by means of such an intuition it is to be put in the mood for a feeling which is itself sublime, in that the mind is incited to abandon sensibility and to occupy itself with ideas that contain a higher purposiveness. So I guess when one views the ocean as in this state, ideas come to one's mind. These ideas themselves are not the sublime. They're part of the understanding of reason. The ideas come from there. But when all that's done, there's still something about it which is grander than the mind and its faculties can comprehend. And I guess perhaps that's where he's talking about the feeling that the sublime is coming from. I think it also talks about this idea of quantity, how the vastness, the greatness of the sublime, how it approaches us as this what he calls absolutely great, that which cannot be compared to in terms of this is sublime, but this is more sublime. There's no sort of scale or quantity or measurement when you get there. And I think in that sense, in the way something becomes incommensurable in terms of different sublime, and when he talks here about the quantum as a sort of a magnitude or a quantity, it does sort of bring in that relation to how things don't become mismatched at different scales, similar to how sort of quantum physics, how macro matter, I think how things operate in large scales are different than how they operate in microscopic scale. I think there's something there to...
What page was that bit you were reading?
129.
Is the paragraph of 5246 the probability logical not to be
So is he talking about, like, is that the bit within the dynamical sublime or the
Yeah, it's the first part.
of the dynamical?
It's just the first part of the sublime,
Oh,
then
right.
he goes to talk about on mathematical and dynamical
Oh, yeah.
after. So it's just the general overview of the sublime. Yeah, so he calls it a magnitude as something like an earthquake, something that shakes the ground, that disrupts something. And Foucault talks about that in the sort of Parisian, doesn't he? How a relationship becomes rocked by the act of truth telling. Perhaps there's something in there.
Yeah, so but if Socrates wasn't aimed to being like a martyr, like for his like politicality.
Well, he wasn't prepared to die politically.
Yeah, he wanted to live it, but on this thing he chose the poison rather than the exile. So I think like because his truth telling is like verbal, obviously he wouldn't have been able to do that from exile. Well, I thought that was the idea. So I thought like. Given the choice, there wasn't any choice, and that's why he chose the poison, so that it would sort of even sort of like almost subverts the.
It's stronger than that. It's that toward the end of the second hour of February 15, finally Foucault reveals what he thinks.
I'm not saying Foucault is saying what I just said.
No, but I am adding to that a little bit of information. It reveals what the real reason why.
Yes. Sorry.
Why Socrates doesn't want to escape, either go to exile earlier or escape once in jail, is that for him the law must be respected no matter what, and it's more important to respect the law than to save one's own life. This is why he accepts the trial, and actually in the trial, when the judges ask him, what do you think your punishment should be? And he says, I don't want a punishment. For my action, I want a prize. But he wants them to accept that they have to give him a prize. So he doesn't want to stay outside that law. He wants to play inside of it. This is why he rejects the whole idea of the public opinion and insists that the taking care of himself and the taking care of oneself or of all his disciples is within respecting the law rather than thinking, because they are telling him, oh, you will dishonor, you will lose your life, dishonor your family, not be able to take care of your children, dishonor your disciples, because everybody will say will not help you to escape. And he said, well, why should we follow public opinion? That's wrong. And then
so if we take that note for a moment, so for example, in I think it was in Burma, where as part of the process over a number of years after the student uprising was quashed in 1890 or thereabouts, one form of protest that some of the monks did was self-immolation. And you could choose that as it's a form of political protest or a form of a form of truth telling. It's an absolute risk. But one of the things that seems to happen over time, I mean, I don't know the situation in Burma quite closely enough, but what actually ultimately led to greater change, and the change that's begun to take place over the last 2 or 3 years, were other forms of truth-telling. That, and the authorities even managed to ignore self-immolation as a form of protest.
Well, in Tibet now,
But maybe it's Tibet that I'm thinking.
they've made it so that the monk in question, superiors, get penalised if a monk sets himself on fire. So it's almost like you can't escape.
Yeah.
And in that way, the immolation is more of an exile than a form of truth-telling.
I mean, it's very difficult to find. It seems quite clear cut, and it's told beautifully as well by Foucault. But I kept thinking to situations now in the way that attempts to tell truth now are ignored or co-opted by exactly the same forces that against which protest is being offered.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I believe the contemporary art faces this problem
Yes,
extremely evident. Whatever you throw at the art system is phagocytated and spat out as a commodity. So it's no way.
So how does one tell the truth now?
Get a PhD.
I think, yeah, tragedy and comedy.
As in the kind of Greek structures of
Dramatism. Structurally, I think they are means of cohesion.
I mean, Zizek talks about over-orthodoxy as well, doesn't he, as another means.
But the acceleration is the thing that is
Yeah.
now. Apply the rules even further than they want.
Yes, exactly.
They want them to apply them.
That's it.
A big theme in post-colonial theory as well, sort of strategic over-identification.
Yeah.
In some way sort of undermines that which you're identifying with. Yeah, I mean, only if it's perceived as such.
Yes.
Yeah.
But generally, it's a bit, like making a fool of yourself in front by playing what your enemy thinks a fool is, rather than irritating the opponent. Is an action, an ironic action that helps your side believe less in the authority of your enemy. Because laughter undermines the authority. That could be one thing, but you're absolutely right. It is constantly recaptured at an incredible speed.
Yeah.
The other thing that this always disrupts sort of any social expectation is accidents. Truth comes out of accidents, not only in the creative way, but also because accidents are always physicality triumphing over what you expect. So
you mean really accidents when I trip over, I just bang my face into the wall by mistake?
I mean, you can have comic and tragic accidents, and that's the connection that I see with it. They can be really funny or they can be really tragic, but they always do that reversal that you have to have for cohesion, which gets rid of the desire of the other, because the desire of the other is about expectation and repetition, and accidents always subvert that.
When you say desire of the other, you mean it's trying to fulfill the desire of the other?
What is it? He calls it the common opinion.
That's fine, because you're right, and it's in that passage of the common
Page
opinion where
105.
he starts sorting the problem out. Have you got the text?
Yeah, I've got sort of the first part.
Otherwise,
You're still on, what is it, chapters?
we are February 15, second hour.
Okay, yeah, I think I've
You got it?
Yeah.
But even the method shouldn't be prefigured, or isn't prefigurable, so that it can then be like, oh, this works, we'll do this again. So we're going to, you can sort of risk ways in practice. You can't guarantee. if you then say, oh, this method works, this is the way to go about it, then you've sort of lost the plot.
I guess that connects to what you were saying about purpose, purposeness without purpose. I mean, you can't have a recipe for a reason, really. You can sort of, I don't know, create a set of conditions that make it possible.
That's the thing about an accident, it's not purposeful. It never is.
It is indeed. I found, not to bring the discussion somewhere else, but Wittgenstein often asks, how is it possible to make a mistake here? And I found it one of the best things to keep in my mind while making art. How is it never possible? How is an accident possible? Because it's precisely what you cannot control. An accident or a mistake done on purpose is pathetic. It's like bad acting.
Purposive, yeah.
Well, it's like Lacan, it's the polite letter, or the accident is, although you may feel it's an accident, there is a suggestion that at some level you actually intended exactly that effect.
Yes, you can unconsciously, but it can only be unconscious.
How does this speak to you when this happened? Not at all?
Not
Not even, there is not even a word or a sentence that rings a bell for you?
no.
But how do you think about like questions of truth then, or truth? How do you like think about that?
If I understand what the direction of your research is, when you say that it's sculpture and light, I try to draw a parallel to see if this could make sense in different directions. Without light, you cannot see the piece, the sculpture. But at the same time, we still think that the sculpture is the object, and that the light is somehow extra. Probably your work instead wants to explore and question precisely that. Now, trying to draw a very daring bridge, I would say that what Foucault suggests, what Foucault wants to say, is that the importance is on the light side. There isn't a solid truth as this stone of the sculpture to refer to, but the fact that one has to light up, open up, and find a way to engage with sculpture is, to him, what's the most important part of truth-telling is. Did I make any sense of this? In other words, he's not saying there is one truth, and some people are in touch with that, and therefore they can say it. But he's obviously saying it makes no sense to accept that each of us would have a different truth, because it wouldn't be truthful, it would be opinions. So that we would be caught between two extremes that are both not giving us any possible path forward ahead. And instead it turns it around, and it's very close to the work of Kant in this sense. He says, your telling the truth must be something that allows you to have a position, and it's a risky position, as we've said in the first lecture, because that truth is that you as a subject are not carried by the general opinion. You can make that step back, put that distance. You have to take care of the fact that you are yours. So the self you have is yours, is not dominated, controlled, packaged, bought and sold in all the values. And it's very difficult. No, this is what Ed was bringing up now. How do you resist that? Because as soon as whatever gesture you do, the systems we are in are so fast in taking it back that then it seems almost pointless or hopeless to do these attempts.
And it could be that it's because of that you need another person to make this exercise, because the other person has to share this opinion with you. If it's secretly, it's even better. It's when you find that it is truth. And in the same way, an artist finds the truth with the viewer or the observer when he can
the works
he can connect with the viewer in this truth that he's creating, and they both share, or they both understand in that moment.
So to take that, and you were saying about Foucault sometimes being criticised for offering a procedure which is egoistic. It's focused very much on the self, but it's focusing on the in a sense it's neither for the self or just for the other. There's something between the two. Pick up on what Oscar said there and just unpack a little bit further.
Well, I was sort of thinking while you were saying that there's a sort of issue of scale, because if you're sort of verifying truth with somebody else, I mean, it's only a sort of a matter of time before you're verifying it with 5 people, 10 people, 1,000, and you arrive at a sort of like common opinion again. So how do you differentiate between the two was what was going through my mind right then. I mean,
I believe that's the twist. Probably the twist is not the right word, but the term that Foucault on the basis of Kant makes is precisely saying that the truth that is told is not an object, is not the referent of a sentence. Truth is X, this or that. But is this exhortation of taking care of oneself. So finding a way, whichever is the situation, to remember and to inhabit, more importantly, that one's self is of the property of one. Not completely, always in various ways, but my understanding, maybe I am completely wrong, but my understanding is that one has to remember, because then it follows Socrates that keeps speaking about this internal daemon that speaks to us and gives us moral advice, often in the negative way, not in the positive way.
it's very Freudian.
Yeah, as well. Yeah, no, but you can Socrates can be criticized for being the inventor of self-censorship. Also because the demon inside the person always speaks negative. They say, don't do this, don't do that. Never say, yes, do this, yes, do that. So there is a lot to be studied there too. But what Foucault, to me, seems to take is that there is a constant invitation to listen to yourself, or at least be able to make the exercise of listening before just following and embracing, obeying what is not embracing, it is not constricting, not have no pleasure. Before obeying the opinion of the status quo, the most immediate choice. Has anybody seen a French film that came out 2 or 3 years ago of Gods and Men? It's a wonderful film, it's worth seeing. It's about a group of monks that are French monks in Algeria. This true story takes place at the beginning of the Civil War in Algeria in 92, 93, or 96, so that period. And they are threatened by the new fundamentalists that want every form of ex-colonial power out. The local authorities, secular and military, wants them out. And it would seem all natural to leave. And there are some beautiful scenes where all these monks are being tormented and migratory birds that leave because the season changes. And then they say, that's not the point. And one of them says, well, look, we've already renounced our lives a long time ago. We didn't get our lives to go. So now it's fine. We've already released that kind of fear and preoccupation. We are staying. And they end up being killed. That's actually the real story. But there is something. I remember the movie because there is a scene where the leading monk, I don't know what the technical title would be, is really tormented because it is his responsibility also the life of the others. And he's sitting on the side of a lake, and these birds are taking off because the season is changing. And he said, you really realize it would be natural to leave. Ben would leave, but they have already taken leave of that kind of life, of the general way of living. They are living somewhere else. So with all the due differences, Foucault is speaking of something similar. You know, they are not. What he's speaking of here is, or better on the example of Socrates, is trying to say the public opinion, the image, the honor, the respect might demand us to do a number of things, but there is something more fundamental, which is the fact that we own ourselves, or at least we should try to own ourselves constantly, rather than being appropriated or go under the possession or other forms of dispossession. I mean, the way Lauren uses the word is double, I think. But so there is this interesting element.
I agree with you, but for me the interesting thing is why you need another person to tell the truth. Why you need someone to listen to you, because all this process you can do it by yourself, thinking, you know, this is what I want, this is taking care of myself, but you need another one, or you need the doctor in psychotherapy, or you need the priest when if you are Christian.
Because he talks about this role of the auditor.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what
yeah.
he introduces it, doesn't he?
Oh.
And then he introduces this role as being structurally slightly different in relation to the sage, in relation to the teacher, in relation to the prophet.
Yeah, it has to be someone who trusts you or something like that. Not necessarily a priest.
Well, I thought there's something about this. There's a structural similarity that the auditor has to take that risk with you.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then in the sense that seems to me how. In a sense, perhaps the way of telling the truth is there a way in which you can invite the other to take the same risk that you're also taking? How can you do that? Is that the form of truth-telling?
It is as well to get rid of the opinion as well, because if you both share this thought, it's not anymore an opinion, you know, it's something else, because the opinion is personal. Yeah, it's kind of.
I agree, but probably there is also. Because I seized upon the risk one takes. The first seminar, I thought this is a brilliant idea. We are not concentrating upon what one says, but upon the modality with which one says it.
Yeah.
So the fact that one is willing to take a risk to put himself or herself at stake attached to what one says sounds like a brilliant way of claiming truth in one way or another. And Johnny Rajito said, but then how about the terrorist that blows himself up with the dynamite belt? That's ultimately, there's not even a risk, it's just you state something at the cost of your life. Would that fall into it? And it becomes much more problematic if you put it in these terms.
Yes.
Then, reading this other seminar, the February 15th one, I would put it, because Oscar's point is, I believe, is very, very important. My idea is that I would put it as not, if taking the risks would equal to say, I believe this is true, or this is where I stand. With the second seminar, there is a lot of emphasis on the I, but not the I as an opinion. But this is where I stand. So I am already creating not a distance as a separation, but a distinction, an individuation.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's a risk that if the other one takes this step of individuation as well, take care of him or herself as separating, then yes, we are risking, but that is where the subject can only come into existence in relations. Therefore, it is immediately political. It cannot be without politics.
Yeah.
It's a bit convoluted description, but this is the way I bring the two things together. I think it was a very good point that you brought up here.
Perhaps it's in relations that actually there's a liberation of the subject, and that's why it's truth-telling. So rather than the reinstalling, so it's like this care of the self is actually about not neglecting otherness in this sense of I don't think it's about like possessing the care of the subject. It's about, I think it's it was what he said initially was I don't think it is about like practice where I don't think it is narcissistic. guess it's the reversal of the subject. So it's not a reversal, that must be my pet word for this week.
I believe it's not you.
Although you can't care for yourself, unfortunately. It's just confused.
You use two expressions. It's not the recuperation but liberation of the subject.
Yes, it's so in truth telling, it's not about being suffering. It's about that there's a capacity for emergence where one isn't suffering at the moment, and that's when that happens. It happens like the tree that falls in the forest that no one sees. Is the subject in that sense, and that's the truth to me.
But are you saying, because what you were describing is, it occurred to me that what we haven't yet said is that the subject is formed in this taking care of herself or himself. In these, I mean, I believe that my understanding of it is really that in this distancing, at least a new way of being subject comes to the surface. So it's not recuperating, freeing, liberating something that already exists. The subject comes into existence by this ability to have a self. And the self that then is immediately exposed, vulnerable, needs to take a risk in order to exist, therefore can be annihilated at any time. But the subject emerges when the subject can take care of the self. On page 110, on the second out of 15, after having, because for a while he analyzes what did Socrates mean with the sentence, crypto, we all remember we all a cock to a slave. And
110.
110, yes.
Okay.
And he goes all over the place, he analyzes all the commentaries made, and no one to him is satisfactory. Then he goes along with Dumézil's interpretation, and he finds that in these texts and in other texts, in other passages, Plato makes Socrates say that if one follows public opinion, the soul would incur in some sort of corruption that is similar to that of the body in illness. So there is something to be cured. And by being able not to follow public opinion, one somehow saves life and cures the soul from that disease, that corruption. So he sort of equiparates a bit between the soul and the flesh. The soul can be corrupt as the flesh would be in illness. And then on page 110 it says, we must pose the question, what is this curing, this activity by which both Socrates and his disciples have been cured with the help of the God who must be thanked? There is no sense in asking, as some might perhaps be tempted to do, whether this operation of cure as medical activity is already something like psychiatry, and then it goes on. We cannot discover what is at issue in this kind of anachronism a posteriori. It makes more sense to try to situate this operation of cure, to which Socrates alludes several times, in the field of practices in which it could figure for the Greeks in general and for Socrates in particular. And this general field of practice is precisely all that is called epimenia, caring for someone, looking after a flock, taking care of one's family, as it is often found. And so it goes back to, the cure is the taking care, taking possession in the form similar to your possession and dispossession concept. And then it follows from that then the parousia has to do with the respect of the law. I can't find the sentence where it says. Yes, at the end of halfway to page 111, at the end of the paragraph, he says, well, as then he asks in between what we just read and now, how can the society play this role of taking care, or how taking care works at social level, and not at the level of the subject only. And after the square parenthesis with paragraph, Foucault goes on writing, The laws are precisely the agent of epimelia.
Oh, sorry, I'm lost. Where are we?
Half page 111,
Halfway.
just after the square parentheses with the little asterisks.
Oh, right, yeah.
The laws are precisely the agent of epimelia, and just as it will be said in the Phaedo that we must not escape from the world because we are watched over by the gods, epimeles like a god care for us. Similarly, in the Crito, the reason one must not escape from prison, that is to say, leave the city and go into exile, is that, like the gods who watch over the whole world, the city laws watch over the citizens, take care of them, are vigilant, they have concern. You find again this theme of epimelia. And that opens up this notion to me of social, individual and social that can only exist in together.
I find the terms self as other and other as self useful because of this caring for the whole sort of city as if it was you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the other as the self, and then the self as other is the identity that Lauren was talking about.
Yes, but one should be careful not to fall into for itself, for oneself, for me, for the other, that constitutes the Hegelian triangle of dialectics, because it's not here in the same way.
The care doesn't become universal in that sense, does it? It's always a care for another or the self. It's not something that's applied as a whole, unconditionally. It's the truth. Or the care is, I guess, conditioned, or is conditional based on the truth telling of one to other.
Yeah, I think this thing of universality is important.
Well, the universality doesn't really, the universal doesn't really care in that sort of sense. It can't care the way a singular subject person cares.
But it's to do with no boundaries and no limits. It's to do with the sublime.
I think with the truth, no? Universal truth.
But if you go on page
More than
113,
limits.
there is a paragraph halfway through the page.
What?
113, at the end of the lecture. So you can see that Socrates' death, the practice of his parrhesia, which exposed him to the risk of death, and well and truly exposed him to this risk since he actually dies as a result of it. The practice of his truth-telling, and finally this devotion to inducing others to take care of themselves, just as he took care. Sorry, I found this wrong. Just as he took care to take care of himself. All form a very closely woven ensemble whose threads intertwine throughout the series of Socrates' death or various dialogue. So what is his practice of parrhesia, his truth-telling, is nothing but exhorting others to take care of themselves. So it is really not claiming a truth, but pushing a mode of action that allows them to become subjects.
But it's in a very particular modality.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's a modality that, in the first place, is not a subject that says, oh, I am autonomous, separate. No, it's a subject that, first of all, respects the laws.
Subject to the law.
Subject to the law as well. But is not flat and indifferentiated.
That passage about the law really sort of complicates things.
Quite a bit, yes.
It's. I mean, on the one hand, I was thinking that it's a kind of the care of the self is a kind of withdrawal and a claiming of one's sovereignty outside the identity that's bestowed on you through sort of common language and common society. But this sort of respect for the laws is then a sort of a piety in the face of those very structures that give you an identity in some way. So it's it's hard to sort of
I
reconcile.
think that
the
one
two.
needs to place that within that overall Greek principle that virtue is a pride for itself. So one is not virtuous because you gain something else out of it, but not being virtuous is all you get out of being virtuous, and it's embodied in that respect of the laws quite directly. Because otherwise, you're right. It seems to contradict what has been said so far.
It's making me think about the Apollonian and the Dionysian, you know, the tension between reason and unreason. And it seems to be respecting both. And I'm really interested because the society that gave us Socrates gave us theatre. And I'm really unsure there's a connection.
Also gave us the sophists, who are
Yeah.
much sort of maligned
Yeah.
as a group of people.
Yes, because they would have been here and heavily criticized from this point of view as those that would make, take leave of truth altogether and make opinion prevail. Although Socrates has often been seen as one of the sophists by even his contemporaries. There is a comedy of Aristophanes where Socrates hangs in a basket from the ceiling and talks freely about anything and everything. And so this is certainly not presented as it turns out.
There's taking your point earlier about scale. There's an interesting dilemma about taking care of the citizens. You're doing this, you know, not on behalf of yourself, not necessarily just on behalf of you or these people around the table, but you know, all of the wealth of Birmingham that surround us. And yet at the same time, there's a very definite move about this this discovery of the self through removal from the common perception or from the common good. So there's a potentially awkward relationship about how you about placing yourself in the position of saving the other from themselves. But it's that's and I'm sure. What's the solution that Foucault offers to that?
Because I haven't read further.
It's like you go out just to see what's happening and then get into to tell everyone what is wrong or something like that. No? This kind of movement. Be able to think outside the box, but then get into the box to tell everybody or something like that. To change what is happening, what is wrong.
On pages 83 to 84, just tell this, Foucault tells the story of how the oracle came, well, Socrates asked the oracle, who is the wisest person in Greece? And
Yes.
the oracle says, Socrates is the wisest person in Greece. So how does he go about proving that what the oracle said is true?
By going through society top to bottom.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And he questions each person individually, from politician to craftsman, and all the different forms of knowledge they claim to possess or they don't actually possess. They always claim to possess more knowledge than they actually have. Politicians themselves thought they were wise, but they were not wise at all. Some craftsmen knew many things, much more than Socrates knew, but all of them, ignorant politicians or knowledgeable craftsmen, shared the belief that they know things that in reality they do not know. They believe that they know things which actually they don't. Whereas Socrates knows that he does not know these things. So the absolute difference between Socrates and everyone else is that people say they know things, but actually they don't. But he says that he knows that he doesn't know these things. This is what Kierkegaard talks about. Socrates is the only one which can separate between what he knows and what he doesn't know. He knows what he doesn't know. How do you know what you don't know?
I suppose not only that, he knows what other people don't know, because he's telling them.
Because he knows
You
what
don't,
he doesn't know.
you don't know that you don't know. So I mean, the measure of truth, the measure of the truth of the oracle's message, is still sort of Socrates.
It's always funny because behind Socrates' stage modesty there is plate of infinite arrogance.
Yeah.
And it's very, it's at times quite difficult to keep them apart.
Well, I don't know, because it's not like it's the letting it happen. It's the practice where he's going to let the truth happen rather than sort of possess it. It's that refusal of like it's not going to accept the truth of the oracle. He's going to let truth happen by practice.
Sort of talks a lot about sort of process of veridiction, doesn't he? Which is the sort of passage through all the sort of social strata. But it's still sort of him going through those strata and facing people one on one. And at the end of the day, he is the one who's measuring whether what they say is sort of true or not. So it's, I mean,
it's heavily rhetorical, or highly rhetorical exercise. Yes, yes. This is also why he is being often sort of demoted from this position of unique figure and assimilated with sophists. If you like, these performers are going around town asking, what do you know? I don't know anything. And through careful questions, always leading people to say what he wants them to say. Obviously, is far less.
But do his questions do that?
Yes. If you read the dialogues,
Do they?
yes, they're complete setups.
So, okay, in terms of a structure of truth-telling now, to give a parallel, we could set up an artistic practice which is questioning a mode of knowledge that accepts doubt as a mode of truth-telling, or as a mode of knowledge, of self-knowledge, or the production of the self through doubt. But there's also, I mean, the common practice, certainly members of my family and friends would regard, in a sense, they're quite happy for me to do that, to deal with that, to worry about that particular issue. So there's, for a large part of our culture, they're quite happy in a sense for artists or for philosophers, if they want to go and have a coffee and stroke their beards and go where they want to. And do that on our behalf, in a sense, with as long as it doesn't trouble me. And actually, I resent paying for it as well. So, could you do it and not be paid for it at the same time? And there's a difficulty in having the need for the question to be asked, to be given that space. It's as if there's the idea of doubt itself is not permissible.
Yes, but this is precisely why Socrates was on trial.
Yeah.
Because he was accused of corrupting the youth, but the corruption was not simply the sexual superficial, it was precisely that he was telling the youth of the aristocracy, think with your head. And
I missed that last bit.
he was telling the youth of the aristocracy of Athens, think with your head.
Playing with your head.
Think with your head.
Oh, right. Think.
Be yourself. And in a moment when Athens was going from its apex of sophisticated culture to becoming, going through 30 years of dictatorship, being occupied by Sparta, becoming a conformist, big economic power with nothing else attached, that was a problem.
Yeah.
Even more so if you think, this is going far out now, but how for the Greeks, what is sacred was far more important than what was divine. So all the limits posed to humans in front of nature, in front of the perceived natural order of things, were paramount, were the real laws of the universe. Then obviously think with your head, be yourself, might potentially challenge that, and it's challenge the order of things. It was the ultimate hubris, the ultimate arrogance that could not be accepted, was always punished with death. So he was teaching that. Therefore, there was you had to be good to that. So yes, you're absolutely right. It's
Oh, you said that. I'm confused now. Oh, right, okay, no, I've got
Because
written now.
one thing that I've been curious about in the setup for this series of pairing Kant with Foucault, one of the things that has been it's kind of framing the room or framing the discussion in a sense, and Johnny refers to it occasionally, is that Foucault uses the same, adopts the same method or methodology, if you like, of finding a way to ground a truth event, if you like, or a truth of the subject.
Mm-hmm.
That Foucault uses the same procedure as Kant.
Mm-hmm.
And because I've not properly, this is not confession, but not properly spent the time going back over Kant, and it's 20 years since I read it, and because we've stumbled our way around it into a sense in some of the discussions, I don't feel as if I'm confident enough in how Kant produced that to then see how Foucault has as well. Johnny keeps coming back to the telos as being, in the sense that you can't find you find the ground because you're already in it. It cannot be other than it because it cannot be other than the mode in which you find it because of the nature of cognition. But
Mm-hmm.
do you want to? Does anybody have a take on this? What exactly is this procedure that this kind of, I mentioned structure
I
specifically.
believe you will get different answers, several answers all converging on one point.
I'm not sure I've really got the
So what is the structure, the procedure that Foucault adopts in order to find the subject of truth? What is this procedure that he's adopted from Kant? So how do we see Kant's method of the analytical in the way that Foucault is also?
It's very clear what you're asking.
I'm just, this is completely unthought out.
Go for it.
But I think it might be linguistic.
Just take us towards Wittgenstein.
That's what we were doing when we did groundless grounds last year.
Related with
It's
ethic.
not to do with grounded grounds.
No, it's kind of something related with ethic. What is common for all the... I think it's because of that you need other person, because there is something you have to find in common with all the people. This kind of universality we were talking before. But
Well, I suppose Kant says one of the most important things is everyone has a right to freedom and a right to the truth. Truth isn't something which is
Belongs to anyone.
just for the politicians or whatever. And it becomes one's duty to find the truth, not to oneself, not to in relation to a general, a universal. It is one's duty to oneself to tell the truth, to give the truth, to enact the truth.
and it's this duty that is the common point
I can
with
understand
Foucault.
that in terms of how one might identify or locate where truth might be. It's not in the subject, it's not in an object, it's somewhere in that relationship between the two. But what I don't yet have is a grasp of the procedure that Kant uses to get there and that Foucault adopts to get to his place.
In my interpretation of this, I love this question because it's something I'm working on towards the art questions. The short answer is the concept of transcendental. The long answer is explaining what transcendental means. In the Critique of Pure Reason, which we were reading at the end of last year, Kant operates a famous Copernican revolution of philosophy, where he steps out of the problem of the object and the subject, and as two separated entities. And the philosophy earlier was asking, how do we have things in forms in our brain, in our minds, that allow us to know the object, or everything comes through the senses? And he sort of makes a move that appears as a compromise, because it says obviously some things come through the senses, and obviously other things in our mind that organize that package of experience that comes through the senses for us. But where it becomes very interesting. It says there is a funny leap, sort of double acrobatic leap, where we can only experience an object in space and time, but space and time themselves don't exist as our modes of apprehension.
Yeah.
So they are transcendental. And you would have to have, in order to have space and time per se, you would need to have all the objects that have been perceived in the past and all those that will be perceived in the future, all of them draw a totality in order to have space and time. You can't, because it's an infinity. So this description of space and time remains a non-concluded circle somehow. It's transcendental. It's never is adopted, is used as a ground, but it is not.
Yeah.
So from that, then you can jump to the person without purpose, or the aesthetic object, the object of aesthetic experience method, that does not have an end, although is cohesive, acts as if it had an end, but doesn't have an end for purpose. And here you have this very interesting interpretation of Foucault that says truth is not claiming this or that, but is this exhortation, this invitation of behaving in a certain way without any prescription attached to it. So there is this similar or analog movement that goes from I'm telling you to do this or I am knowing that to the mode of doing it.
Yeah.
And that to me is the link that runs in between the two.
Yeah.
I think
That's really helpful. That's really helpful.
there's sort of a formal emptiness in the critique of practical reason as well.
That's
The
absolutely
law
true,
is- It's totally empty in its content. It's not sort of do this, do that. It's kind of do it in such a way. And maybe
Yeah, you're absolutely right. No, like laws are to be respected, but how do you tell what to do and what not to do? And one of the prescription is do it as if this could be done to infinity and still be positive. For example, so it doesn't describe what is good or not. It just tells you how to navigate your choices each time. So, and this is a similar kind of prescription. Take care of yourself, but remember that there is some space you can put between the self and the public opinion, the self of what you're expected to do, the self of the representation of things, so that you might decide to embrace it, or you might not. That's somehow...
I like the word exaltation. I like the word exaltation. Sort of sounds more like emergence. It sounds more like a sort of radical difference.
I'm thinking if in Latin exhortation, orto is the orient where the sun rises, and ex, pulling it out of that, yeah.
It's like
So
adventure, right?
So prod this horizon to make the sun emerge. So
Yeah,
you're
so
right.
I suppose I'm thinking like, well, I think Foucault is sort of pointing to, in Socrates, more of a kind of immanent move rather than a transcendental. So I wouldn't say it's like a repetition of the Kant move.
I don't know if it is a strict repetition, but certainly there is a... You're
It's
right.
a formal, a structural homology.
Yeah, no, you were right in saying, well, we're reading them together. We have accepted the assumption that there is a link. Now,
Yeah.
what's the link? Yeah, absolutely legitimate question.
Yes, I suppose it's to what extent if the subject stays intact, it's like if there's still a subject and like if there's still A and B. Well, there's one bit where in the Kant thing I was reading, he's talking about he's talking about the subject and the predicate. So with the synthetic, he's talking about like when I was imagining it as well, with the analytic, I was imagining it as like we've got like sort of, I'm calling this A, and then there's something to be added. With the analytic, it's always sort of already in here. It's like parts, totals, and wholes. But with the synthetic, it's like he still says there's an A, but he says B is out here. And then there's the relation of what makes them adhere, and that's the transcendental. but the problem with this is there's still a claim to an A and a B. There's still so that's Kant, but with Foucault, I think he's starting to sort of kind of reverse what is said by the subject, and like there isn't, like say A was truth, there isn't truth, and then we add another bit of truth onto it. That isn't the kind of truth that's being talked about here, because that would mean there was a prefigured truth, and then you could add another bit onto it. Instead, there's this truth. There's truth as the telling, where so.
Yeah, we're talking about truth as a verb rather than as a noun.
It doesn't become the truth until it becomes attached to the telling. So it becomes the truth hyphen telling is when the truth and the telling sort of start to happen. If you get rid of the hyphen, it's just separate homonyms.
So it's not that you're starting with a truth there, or the Kant is starting with a truth, but it's a procedure through which the truth becomes.
Take it. Yes, I mean, this was just when I was reading the pure reason bit introductions thing where he was talking about the analytic and synthetic. So that's where he was talking about this, whether the predicate was contained or not in the subject. So I'm not quite sure. Like when he gets to the sublime, sort of there's things that moved on a bit. So that last thing he said.
I'm sorry, I have to go. See you next Wednesday.
Well, Kant talks about how laws are conceived in a representational democratic society. It's following Rousseau, the social contracts, the right for people to be free, to uphold the law. And I think the way the law ethics becomes constructed is important for Kant. You have to hold someone, your representative, accountable, but only if you do your duty as well in upholding the law. So it's all moved to uphold the law, but also to sort of make the law via a representative. So truth becomes enacted in two different ways.
It requires both.
You can't sort of tell someone to make the laws for you. You have to do your part to uphold them as well.
This is where the duty to truth, to seek the truth comes in.
Yeah.
So this democratic society is not only a society of rights, but it's also a society of responsibilities and duties in some ways.
Yes, but I suppose I'm thinking that his like notion of autonomy. So, but isn't but the autonomy there is presumably is more active, like acting, like the but I suppose I'm thinking of if you were doing this move from Kant to Foucault, so then I was thinking interesting to compare the notion of autonomy Kant with the question of sovereignty that's raised more with the cynics, which is the same as what we're talking about with how we take the notion of the subject in the care of the self bit.
It's interesting that you bring up, because I don't read the critique of practical reason for a long time, but the radical autonomy of the subject that Kant posits, put together with the fact that in the pure reason, when he speaks about knowledge, he says that the subject is one of those things that can never be reached entirely, because as one experiences and knows the outside world through these modalities of space-time and intellect and reason, so is the interior experience that was always instead assumed to be self-evident, that too is packaged through time and space. It cannot be reached directly. So the subject is the transcendental unity of a perception in critical purism, something that is never completely concluded, and at the same time, in practical reason, is the radicality of the subject. Is it not? So it is dynamic. What I'm saying is that it is dynamic, never concluded, always in the making, and at the same time,
Laws are always in the making.
as well.
Ethics is always.
But at the same time, is the main reference point, which brings us to this. To see Foucault in this light, I think helps. Because then it makes sense that the prescription of taking care of oneself or taking care of yourself is an open indication. It does not. If Socrates would have said, do these and don't do that, then it would have closed down this continuous making, this dynamic cohesion of the subject. Instead, there isn't. So, how one takes care of oneself, well, it's open to interpretation, debate, mistake, risks, as it is. So it's a transcendental form of truth in this sense, because it is not ever concluded into one or another modality.
So it's about making the relationship between time and space flexible. It's about opening it up.
In which way do you mean this?
What Kant and Foucault are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say that? That it's about things that are fixed because time and space are fixed in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And so radicalising things, opening them up to is about changing the way they relate to each other.
No, the way I understand it is that there is a shift from assuming that some things are absolute, so immutable in time, external and fixed, to think that though they cannot be perceived like that, and they are turned from identities or principles, as in principles, as in the first thing out of which everything then follows. Primal causes, what the answer to the question why, they are turned into how is this happening? So it becomes very scientific and not theological. What is happening here? So in certain way, Kant opens up the entire way of thinking for modern science. That is not asking what life is, but how it functions, for example. So it is not making fluid the relationship of space and time as in they are separated or anything, because Kant does insist that the object of experience, once packaged with the universal space and time, it is an object of space, it's an object of knowledge, we can share it, we can communicate it, we are knowing something, it's no longer an opinion. It really is a matter that makes sense. What we cannot speak of as we did before are space and time in themselves. They are no longer absolute. They are no longer the Newtonian stage on which all events took place. But they are our forms for perception. This is what the speculative realists criticizing that John keeps referring to, because they reject that. They say Kant, by doing that, turns everything into a subjective position that destroys the art existence of the outside world.
Yeah.
Did this answer at all your question, Kate?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
Is the transcendental the same thing as the a priori synthetic unity? I'm just trying to get my head around terms here. From a few weeks back, we were talking about a priori synthetic unity.
The a priori synthetic unity belongs to the transcendental. Yes, it is, because one needs the a priori synthetic unity is one version of the purposiveness without purpose. As in, you need to think that something is synthetic and has a unity and stays together. So that's the fact that you need to think it is a priori makes it a priori, but at the same time it's not there physically a priori. You had a beautiful way of describing this, saying that one is logically existing and one is really not existing, and vice versa. Last week, it's something that we need in reality, but doesn't exist at the logic level. Or do you know?
Well, I guess an analytic is it's purely functional. It prescribes a function, tells things what to do, it has no meaning. A synthetic, something that's synthetic, has an openness to it. It contains within itself undecidable propositions because it's open. It takes into account a priori experience. It's synthetic as a relation. Synthetic as a relation, not as a sort of a Hegelian combination which takes together everything. Synthesis as a relation between a priori and experience, or Kierkegaard uses body and spirit, and with the eternal as a sort of as the synthetical move which allows possibility to come through. It's in the relation that possibility and freedom actualizes itself as a relation, not as a combination, so nothing can be removed or added. Something can be removed or added, but it takes a qualitative or a discontinuous leap rather than something that's continuous. As a move of sort of positive philosophy rather than negative philosophy, which always places things in contradiction. It places experience and metaphysics in contradiction to each other. How doubt can be seen as very much a negative philosophy move. How Descartes says, I doubt, therefore I am. It requires the doubt before the being. Or is it the other way around? Is it the being is required before there can be doubt? Is there possibility before there doubt, or is there doubt before possibility happens? If there's doubt first, then it's a very much a negative philosophy move, which is sort of concretized in Hegel. And if the being becomes the I am, the self becomes before the doubts, then it's very much a discontinuous positive leap, which is what Kierkegaard tries to sort of argue in the concept of anxiety. Why sin, it doesn't necessarily mean that sensuousness and sexuality is always posited as sin, as a historical continuous move of sin, something that's always already there, that always takes in the sensuousness and sexuality to be sin. How does it break out? Does it require one to be, does it require the self before one makes that negative move via doubting?
Well, great, that's great. All I could pick up from, I suppose, with the end question, it made me think back to the cynics bit.
Do you think there's a relation? What do you think the difference is between a cynic and a skeptic? Because Kant is trying to answer the skeptics, such as Hume, by saying that we can't know anything of this. We just have to. We should focus on sort of what is pleasurable. Cause and effect, really. There's no reason to think that cause and effect are eternal. How do we So how do we know something without falling back on metaphysics? But how do we stop ourselves from turning into skeptics and start doubting everything?
Mm.
I don't know what the difference between cynics and skeptics is, to be honest.
And the things,
That
I
might,
have to reread it.
that might provide a way to
But there was a
answer.
whole like detachment from the world of the things like if they take care of the self. Don't let yourself be carried by public opinion and all that goes with that to the extreme. So that famous visit of Diogenes, cynicist, who lives in a bubble naked, and when Alexander the Great goes to him saying, "I know you're a great wise man, what can I do for you?" and Diogenes looks at him, doesn't even stand up, and says, "Move your to bury the sun from." That's all he wants to ask. It needs nothing from the greatest man on earth, because he has renounced the materiality of things to the point of just being. Cynicist, as in Kino, is the dog, so living like a dog, going as
That's the ancient form of
yeah, as
the
close to the
self-identity.
animal as possible. Not cynicism in the modern, but
Yeah.
I haven't gone far enough to read the cynicist part of this, so I might use
I guess the question of the sin or the sexuality, because the sexuality comes into that practice. So I guess that was the relevant to that sin. It made me think. I'm not saying sexuality is sin, but it seems like
It is.
with the cynics. Well, it's like. Well, there's that aspect to it. It's not just about well, there's self. There's sort of there was like the punishments, or there's the poverty, or there's like abandonment. There's all these different techniques, as well as the like not wanting to be like. For like the masturbation in public, or the animality. That's what the so-called animality. So that's there's that as a practice. That's adopted as a method.
Is that essential?
Truth telling. Yes, the animality being like so. There's a decision to.
There are hilarious examples of that kind of thing, that animality, but also the I can't remember which one it was at the meal where he
Yes.
was excluded or laughed at for being like a dog, and so then he urinated on the guests who were there. But that reminded me of what's the Sacha Baron Cohen's character in that film Borat, where he accepts the hospitality of this bourgeois American semi-rural family, goes to the toilet and brings back to show his turn. It's a very similar structure.
It probably borrows that.
It possibly does.
I believe that because Foucault pairs a cynicist with the Stoics, who were actually probably very far from Socrates, in saying that the bodies we have are actually aggregates of atoms, are appearances, are an impression. So all the passions we have are apparent passions, because actually the real matter is inert atoms that are falling to infinity, have got no differentiation to them. So the idea of endurance, the idea of giving up all the comforts of life, contemporary life, whenever it was Greek time or now, and living as an animal, ignoring pain, doing endurance, all these things, was somehow, they were tangent between the Cynicists and the Stoics. You wanted us to read the 15th lecture 2 weeks ago, and I never got to read it.
Well, I mean, I suppose I was just.
Because if one just reads the table of content of lecture 15, hour 1, hour 2, on hour 1 is page 269. The table of content was The cynic reversal of true life into another life for the author. The traditional sense of sovereign life, the helpful and the exemplary sage. The theme of the philosopher king. The cynic transformation, the confrontation between Diogenes and Alexander. The praise of Heracles. The idea of philosophical militancy, the king of derision, the hidden king. And then the other one on page 291, the reading of Epictetus on the cynic life,
Sorry.
historical of the portrait, the philosophical life from rational choice of invocation, ascetic practice as verification, ethical errors of the cynic mission, endurance, vigilance, inspection, responsibility for humanity and government of the world. I mean, we should probably read these and everything else in between by next week, but
I have to go. Is that what you're sort of generally doing? You're sort of working your way
Yeah.
through.
yes.
Okay.
And we do it from 4 to 7.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So it would be the follow-on from these two chapters.
Possibly so. Yeah. What we should do for next time? I mean, Johnny then will have a say next week, but should we go on to the next lecture or jump ahead?
I don't have people decide. I mean, I sort of read it and I should read back before the class, but I struggle with the Kant, so I keep prioritising time for Kant, and then I come to the class and I'm a bit rusty on this. So perhaps people who are reading it still, perhaps we should choose a chapter that they know they would have just read.
So we continued on to February 22nd. The lecture 7.
Bios as object of Socratic poiesia. That sounds interesting.
So the 2 hours from February 22nd.
22nd, sorry.
And it,
27, whichever.
So chapter 7 and 8?
yeah, but is each sort of like pair of chapters from Foucault then matched with a specific text from Kant?
No.
Or?
The specific text from Kant is the critical perspective judgment.
Right.
So the first half.
Yeah.
And we just, for the moment, we just remain with the analysis, the analytical judgment of
I
this.
think they said
We
chapter
didn't
7 and
reach
8.
entirely the
I'm
sublime
not sure
analytical
it's-
sublime, officially.
We haven't started this again yet.
So these are the two.
Yeah.
The two references.
Okay, great.
It's the 22nd
Thank you.
of
Sorry, I
February.
didn't give you the order.
Yes,
Were you added to the Dropbox?
Say-
Were you added to the Dropbox?
Yeah, I think I was. Yeah, but I had to pay for a monthly
Oh no, you
because
should.
it's a big
It's a
old
big
folder
thing, yeah.
of
Yeah, I've
text,
had
isn't
to
it?
pay for more.
Really?
Yeah.
You have to invite more people to share it,
so
so then you
credit
gain
system.
memory.
Yeah.
Yes. You can always set up
Everybody need a
email
vote.
addresses to invite yourself.
Yeah. Ah, good tip.
Loyalty
Yeah, I'll
power.
try that.
Bye. Yeah, how should we follow next week?
Well, I think I'm happy to reread, and
Yeah.
whatever people would like, really.
So do February 22nd.
22nd, 27th. So it's lecture 7 and lecture 8.
Yeah.
And should we venture into the sublime or stick with the beautiful?
We can.
I'd quite like to get my head around mathematical and dynamical sublimeness.
I mean, we didn't do that lie one.
Oh yes,
Oh, yes.
I've got it here.
It was, which one did you say it was in?
It's in practical philosophy.
This one?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
It's in the Dropbox too, yeah. So it's,
Yeah, I thought I looked in that one and I thought I couldn't find it.
It's right at the back.
page 611 to 618.
Mm.
I'm going to read
Well, I suppose the
that
right
one.
to life from philanthropy.
So, it says yours. Let's find it.
It starts at 6:09, I think.
And that's the reading you sent us that you mentioned that was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Whether
right.
it's okay to write to an axe murder.
I'm going to try and read that one. On supposed right to life from philanthropy.
And we give
Well, I
something
guess
specific or just
live.
enjoying
Just-
just flipping the page?
Just looking how long the dynamic on that one was.
Oh, it's not present.
No, I've gone past it. Mathematics
only-
21st, 28th.
And this is the dynamic is much shorter.
Only 40 pages.
Still good, that's that.
It's supposed right to life. Okay.
So is it supposed to write to lie? So we
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
6 pages, it's not too bad.
Yeah, I think we could. That's probably about 6 hours.
and that's for critique practical reasons.
Practical philosophy.
And it's the 22nd of February for this one.
Yeah.
Is it?
What would you say? I somehow, not Johnny asked me, but I took the habit of sending her 2 lines when she's not here. That mostly work for me memorizing what we've done rather than us. That probably is rather than I coming up with something since we got time. What would you say we have reached today? If we have reached, I think we did actually. We went around
You've
quite a
definitely
bit.
reached something.
Wow, that was so much.
I think I'll play back the video. Sorry.
I think we've looked at the transcendental move in relation to Foucault. So that's part of my take home.
Stuart has been very silent.
Yeah, I'm not getting
That's
full stop.
I think it's always important to remember this aesthetic move as a relational rather than a combinatory.
the synthetic move.
Definitely can-synthetic move is which provide the basis for undecidability, openness in a system rather than the closed synthetic of Hegel. And in keeping that open, it provides a means by which the relational allows things to stay apart, to maintain that critical distance which is required between maybe artist and artwork, maybe that which allows one to care for the self in this manner of distance. Heidegger thinks about this as well.
Yeah, I think
You
it's
know,
very similar.
In order to, you don't annihilate the distance, but you bring it into nearness. How do you bring something near without getting so close that there is no more distance? You put things in a standing reserve rather than what he calls the essence of nearing, the thing, allowing the thing to do its thing. How do you get the self to be itself without it just clearly collapsing and going insane?
From purpose evidence without purpose.
Touch that.
Yeah. How do you? Well, if you give the self a purpose, it takes away something from the self. It takes away its possibility.
Ask her if she thinks she'll go nuts.
And also what Ed said, that we were looking at truth as a verb rather than a noun. I thought that was a beautiful image for it. Should we call it the day, or do you want to? We don't have to endure until 7 because
I think we can call it a day.
It's been really good.
it's nice.
Yeah.
We're turning to the pub. I am.
We are
Anyway.
adjourned to the pub.
Did you
yes.
tea?